Larry who? Never heard of her.
What sort of a man is he?
Dick from Bama.
A man like any other, but more so.
Well, I thought he was dead.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show. Let's light this candle.
Welcome into the Larry Alex Taunton Show. I am Amie Beth Shaver here with Larry Alex Taunton. And, here's a question. Where have you been?
I've been in South America, and as you can hear in my voice, I have come back sick, or at least you don't have to worry, but at least with a pretty substantial chest cold. But yes, I have. It's been a very interesting bit of traveling, and we'll factor into some future articles, things I'm working on.
Did you have a good trip? Did you get a lot done?
I did a few interviews when I was down there. I got an article written, but probably not one of my best just because I wasn't feeling, real well when I was down there. So I spent a lot of time, more time sleeping and laying in bed and, that kind of stuff. But anyway, yeah, it was a good trip.
Good. So even though you were sick, look, I think your article was fantastic.
Appreciate it.
And we will use that today to talk. But when you go down there, and I know that you go there a lot, you and Lori do, are there favorite places to eat or there must-visit spots each time that you go?
Yeah, I develop relationships almost everywhere that I go, and I'm adventurous with, Lori would say to you that I live an Indiana Jones kind of life, but not when it comes to my palate. So when it comes to eating, I am definitely not an adventuresome, kind of guy. I find something good and I stick with it. Do you and Chris ever do this where we go out to eat, I order the same thing, and Lori says, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. But it ends up her going, I should have had what you had.
Yes. We call that order panicking.
Yes.
I'll order the same thing. And Chris will try something new, and then he'll end up eating my dinner. But I think it's just a thing. I think it's, you get used to it after a while.
I stick with, if I find a good restaurant, I'm going to wear it out. I find find a meal that I like, I'm going to wear it out.
And I've just learned today that you hate fish.
Yeah, I absolutely hate seafood.
So nobody ever give any seafood recommendations because it's like not even going to happen.
Don't even eat it next to me. The smell of it alone nauseates me.
Okay, all right. You learn something new every day. So I'm glad that trip was well and it went well. But you said, and you are correct, that you guys left and it was spring. And you came back, and it's like the dead of summer.
Yeah, it's crazy. When we left here, sitting out on our porch was so nice. It was in the 70s, 80s in the evenings, down in the 60s. And you come back 2 weeks later, and it's just like we've walked straight into Hades,
True.
So, wow. I don't know what happened when we were gone, but spring has definitely sprung and moved on.
Well, it feels like you can, I don't know. I have a hard time breathing when it's this hot.
Yes.
You get back from a morning walk and you think, oh my gosh, this is going to be a very hot summer.
Yeah. And I'm a man in that I sweat, so by the time I get to my car, I'm already, starting to perspire. So, yes, I don't like it when it's this hot, at least not when you're trying to look nice.
Yeah.
I
totally
You're going
understand.
to a speaking engagement and you're trying to look good. It just doesn't look good when your sports coat, has a wet spot. That just doesn't look
That looks bad. That's not
It just doesn't look good.
Who wants that? But in the South, I guess you kind of get used to it. You make peace. You make your peace with it.
Yes.
As best you can. So on today's show, we are going to tackle the whole issue of guns. And I think that your article laid it out very well, and we will use that as a jumping off point because I think it explains some things that people have had that bother them.
Yeah.
You lay them out in such a way that's very interesting, but you also bring a little history into massacres that are horrific no matter when and where they've happened.
Yeah.
But I think the history of massacres and what weapons were used is also fascinating because it's not exactly what you think it might be.
Yeah.
But before that, we have a segment that you invented.
Yes. Well, it is time for the ABS, the automatic braking system, and Amie Beth Shaver, what are you applying the brakes to today?
I'm literally applying the brakes to something in your car.
My car or all cars?
Just all cars.
Okay.
And as a driver, you drive internationally. We've driven internationally. It's terrifying. I don't care where you do it, especially in Florence, Italy, where the little bikes just zoom past you.
Yeah.
We ended up with 2 tickets the last time we traveled, so we'll never drive there again. But in the U.S., this is specifically the U.S., I would like it if people would begin to use their turn signals. This is quite annoying to me that no one uses their turn signals, and on top of that, we are distracted when we drive.
Yeah.
I don't know about you.
You mean because of this?
Because of our phone. So it's like a twofer. It is please use your turn signal, but also could you please get off of your phone?
Yeah.
I've had to travel a lot the last few weeks. One of our girls is in West Virginia, and so to go up and get her and come back is a whole thing. So I find myself still using my turn signal at night and not being on my phone. But I noticed that there's a good number of people that are on their phones. So I'd like to, just for the rest of humanity, ask people if they could just become better drivers.
I'm guessing there's some kind of something that triggered this. I mean, is there a specific episode
yes,
that you have in mind?
Yesterday, we're at a light and I'm turning in simply to go get a few things. And there's a person that nearly waits through the entire light because they're on their phone.
Yeah. I lay on my horn.
Do you land? Okay, so you don't even give it a courtesy like beep. You're
No, I
going to
will
go
give
ahead and
the
lay it on
courtesy
your.
beep. You know, actually, I would like to invent. I think I could make millions off of this. Frankly,
You heard it here first, everybody.
Yes. If anybody else does this, I get royalties to this. I think how the center of your steering wheel is the horn. It's hard to give a little bit of a tap, because
It is.
you often come out angrier than you intend to be. So I think there should be a smaller little round one that you can hit that kind of gives a sort of little friendly cutesy beep, beep, that
Okay, yeah,
that kind
yeah.
of thing. And then we escalate, to the bigger one. But the one of them is just kind of saying, "Hey, wake up! The light is green. It's time to go." Oh, hey, there's a friend of mine. Versus the
right.
it comes out just a little bit too angry. So I feel like that's an invention that should fund this organization in perpetuity off of that. I think it would work.
I think it would work. I would buy it.
I think
I may have paid
I
for
think
it.
it should come, as a standard feature on all vehicles.
Well,
you
it
just
would
hit
save.
that little button. But yes, I'm an extremely impatient man, and so I don't like waiting for anything. I tend to be in a hurry almost everywhere I go. I'm the guy at the grocery store. There's 3 people in front of me, and that line has 2. I'm moving over to that one. Oh, they just opened another register. I'm moving down to that one. So I'm that way when I'm in line. That is, at a stoplight. I'm ready to go.
Well, you know what? It's funny you say that. I'm finding myself becoming increasingly impatient when driving, and Chris has noticed, calm down. He's having to talk me off the ledge when
Yeah.
we're driving. But I really think
It's usually the other way around.
I know, really.
Yeah.
He's a good driver, and I am becoming impatient. And I think it's because people are on their phone,
Yeah.
and I'm having to wait. And I've got 10 minutes in between whatever I need. So anyway, that's my ABS of the week is
It's a good one. I
please
like
use
that.
your turn signal, and please, in addition, could you just
It's really a
stay off your
public
phone?
a PSA.
It is a PSA.
This
It
is
is, yeah.
This is a PSA.
Yeah.
People out there, be better drivers.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
great.
you're welcome. Thank you. You're welcome.
I'm with you
All
on
the
that.
things. All right. So you also have another segment because it's the Larry Alex Taunton show that I enjoy that you invented a few weeks ago, and we're going to try it today. And I think it's important because it's right on the line. Is it Christian or is it Christian-ish?
Yeah.
Tell me what your thinking was behind that.
Yeah, actually, it kind of happened spontaneously in our last episode because we were talking. I don't even remember what we were talking about. Maybe we were talking about intersectionality or social justice. But I said to you, I think it seduces a lot of Christians because at first I said Christian-y, and I said no. Let's say Christian-ish. And I thought, that could actually be a very interesting kind of segment in a show is, we treat it like a game show, question, is it Christian or Christian-ish? And, because, and by Christianish, I mean, it sounds Christian. It maybe even looks Christian, but it actually isn't Christian. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in the culture these days, more than ever, where a lot of stuff is packaged in a way that sounds and feels and maybe even uses the same language, but that at the end of the day, it has no biblical foundation. So Christian or Christianish.
Okay, so we could use one of the ones we talked about before the show, or this is popping into my head right now because you marked this down as something that was interesting to you, is the idea of tithe as a tax.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's actually a very good one because there are a lot of people who will say, they tend to be progressives, who will say that, increases in taxation to give to the poor, that's like a tithe. That's a Christian thing to do. We should want to pay more taxes in order to help the poor. I've seen this actually for quite some time. Some years ago in the state of Alabama, and gosh, I'm not sure how long ago this was, maybe 20 years ago, Governor Bob Riley was campaigning to raise taxes. What I want to say, your land taxes, your property taxes. And he said, just raise it X mil so that it would go to education. And so he had someone going around stumping for him on this. She was a graduate of Beeson Divinity School, and she was saying that Jesus would vote yes. Mm-hmm. Well, that immediately got my back up because I thought, no, Jesus wouldn't. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to make this sound like an increase in taxes for education, that this is the Christian thing to do. And that's Christian-ish. It's not actually Christian. And what I mean by that is that the state, when with your taxes, the state absolutely, amputates the gospel from your money.
Right.
So if let's say an increase in taxes is to help the poor, and almost never is that actually the case, it's going to enrich someone else or for some other shady project. But let's just suppose that it is, that we all are giving X amount, in taxes that is to go to help the poor. Well, the first thing that the state would do is to lop off, any kind of idea that this has anything to do with Jesus Christ or with being a Christian. They want the state to be seen as your God. The state is giving this to you. You should be grateful to the state. Well, as Christians, no, we render to Caesar what we ought to render to Caesar. But when I'm giving to someone, it is important that they understand the gospel motive behind that I'm doing it because my Lord has been very generous to me, and he's commanded me to be generous to other people, that I'm motivated to do that for a spiritual reason. The gospel is always coupled with it. It's never divorced from it. And so when we're trying to make taxes, something that is coming from the state, sound like it's a Christian thing, it isn't a Christian thing because there's no gospel in it at all. And that's not what biblical giving looks like.
Thank you for that, because I think it is a common statement.
Yeah.
And people are tripped up by it because it sounds good, but beware what sounds good when in actual practice it is a volitional act.
Yes.
And I think the Lord is
always
always
right
looking
there.
at our heart.
Say that
always
word again.
Volitional.
Yes.
Always looking at our heart as individuals. We're not collectively entering the kingdom. It's one by one that we are saved by grace. But that giving has to be out of the overflow of our heart. And I think that's an excellent explanation. All right, so up next, we are going to dive into the whole gun control debate and what's going on in our country. And, the question that you've asked in this article is, are we asking the wrong question? But to start, when we come back, what's going on?
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
Welcome back into the Larry Alex Taunton Show. We're talking about guns. And the title of Larry's article is, we are asking the wrong question about guns. But you make a statement that I think is very interesting at the bottom of the second or third paragraph, and it says this, and I want to talk about it, is this overarching theme coming out of our government, which is that guns are the problem and ordinary Americans should not own them.
Yeah, see, right away, I will, anybody who's followed my work for a long time will know that I'm usually not the first guy to chime in on a topic. I like to sit back for a week or two or more to ponder the issue. And this has been an issue that's been ongoing for quite some time, and so I've had a lot of time to reflect on it. But mass shootings are a relatively modern phenomenon, meaning the last 30 years in a big way. And Americans have owned guns traditionally, historically. Americans have owned guns in large quantities throughout our entire history. So the guns clearly are not the problem. I mean, why were we not seeing, enormous mass shootings, in throughout our history? So they've been kind of recent and rare. So to me, the question isn't about guns. It's why suddenly, and it is suddenly, do Americans, many Americans, want to kill other people? That's the question we should be asking, and that leads us to some very interesting answers, I think.
I agree. And on the way to those answers, is this, what are the arguments, though, against guns that we're using right now?
Yeah, the arguments that Democrats are chiefly employing in talking about guns is they're usually saying, for instance, the Biden administration has gone all in on the argument that the Second Amendment, it's outdated. The Second Amendment was really just about hunting. I mean, people are in rural circumstances. You didn't have a Kroger or a Publix. People were hunting for their own. That's what it was about. That's sheer nonsense. The Constitutional Convention took place in 1787. It took place on the heels of the American War for Independence, the Revolutionary War, and they had very much in view that an armed civilian population was absolutely necessary to the preservation of freedom. And they saw it as, the Constitution, you have to understand, they didn't really see the Constitution as granting you rights so much as recognizing rights that were innate, they're God-given rights. So when it came to guns, a man or a woman, they have the inherent right to defend themselves. You do not have, it's an immoral law to say you cannot own a gun, you can't own a knife, you can't own anything to defend yourself. Justin Trudeau just recently said that. You do not, this is almost a direct quotation. Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, said that in Canada, you do not have the right to use a gun in self-defense. Now, to me, that's shocking because he made that statement without any hint of irony while he's flanked by bodyguards. So he's followed by bodyguards who are armed. Okay, he may say, well, I don't use a gun in self-defense. No, you're surrounded by people who have guns who will use them on your behalf in self-defense situations. So to me, it's arrogant, and it's sending the implicit message, your life, you're not important. I'm important. I deserve to defend myself. You don't. So to me, that is immoral. It is utterly immoral.
Well, and I think that was something that we talked about pre-show is, you're right. It is very ironic, not only that Justin Trudeau stands there with people flanking him on either side, but our legislative officials stand there. Our celebrities in Hollywood
Yes.
are all screaming. Anybody that has any sort of platform is telling, "Oh no, you don't need a gun," but my people have guns.
Yes, exactly.
And so it's just very
Matthew McConaughey
interesting.
goes to speak
I
at the
mean-
White House, flanked by a security detail.
I mean, come on, guys. Like, do you not know that you look ridiculous right now?
Yes.
That we must be the peons and you're the special people?
Yes.
When you get that straight, I'll listen to you.
Yeah.
But until then, but you're right, it's immoral.
I think it's immoral, and I think, listen, the framers of our Constitution, they did not trust government, and they didn't even trust the government they were in the process of creating. That's a very important thing to bear in mind. And because they knew that the tendency of government was to become overpowerful and tyrannical, that all governments, if we were to start tomorrow, and with our finest citizens and colonize the moon and to try to tweak the Constitution in order to create a government and start over, it wouldn't take long before we start trending towards tyranny again. So they knew this. So they built into the Constitution what we call checks and balances. Now, we typically think of checks and balances as applying just to our three branches of government, and this is how they balance each other. But the Second Amendment was viewed as a vital part of the checks and balances, fail-safe, because it's in there to always remind a government that you can't get too oppressive with your people because they might revolt. So this was a very real thing, and that they built in there for that reason. So I'm very much in favor of people being, properly trained and properly armed to defend themselves.
When we had the kids at home for a couple of years, one of the first things we did, Chris arranged for us to take our kids shooting so that they knew we're buying guns, we're going to have a safe, you're going to know how to do this. Turns out the girls are great shots, but they also understand the purpose is for self-defense, and that's what our teacher said is if you are not going to use this to protect yourself or your family, then there's no point, right? But the girls were great. They understood it. We got guns. But I think going back to the founding of our country, what's important, I believe, is that our founders understood inherently what's in the heart of man.
Yes.
And today we don't seem to fully grasp. And even though we're looking straight at evil and wickedness, we can't bear to admit that the heart of man is deceptively wicked.
Yeah.
And I know
That's a
we'll
good
go
point.
there and we'll get there, but I think that's one of the
Well,
most
let's go there right now. Let's go there for just a second, because you're raising a very good point. It's interesting because, listen, there are those people within the Christian faith, Americans who want to say that our founding was strictly Christian. It wasn't. Mm-mm. However, there are those people on the other side who want to say that the Christian faith had absolutely nothing to do with it. That is ignorant in the extreme. The fact is that our founding was deeply, deeply influenced by a Judeo-Christian worldview, where all the founders, were they all Christian? No, but they were all deeply influenced by that ethic. And that comes through in our founding documents. It's true in the Declaration of Independence, in the Constitution, and in a lot of their own correspondence, that they recognize this. But a point that you just made is our Constitution assumes that men cannot be trusted. None of us can be trusted. This is the truth of it. And Jeremiah 17:9, tells us the heart is deceitful above all things. It's desperately wicked. Who can know it? None of us can fathom the depths of our own wickedness or our potential for wickedness. And so any one of us, given extraordinary power, we're inclined to use it. And, I was thinking, maybe if I had more time to think on this, I would think of others. But I can only think of two instances in history where someone had, great power in their hands, a world leader, a president, a prime minister, a Caesar, and walked away from it. And the only two instances I can think of are Sulla, a Roman general who, who took Rome, marched on Rome, and became a kind of Caesar, a dictator, but then walked away from it. The second I would point to is George Washington, because he was so beloved, and Washington and the new American nation was so young and so fragile that if he had wanted to declare himself a king, I'm not real sure that he couldn't have done so. And he honored, the founding. He honored what the system was meant to be. And we were provided with those kind of extraordinary models, who also gave us documents that assume at their core that human beings are very corruptible. And as a result, they need accountability. And the way a citizenry holds their leaders accountable isn't just with voting, it's with the threat of rebellion. Now that will sound strong to some, but you look at what they themselves said. They saw this as an important safeguard and check on tyranny, because they saw what had happened in Europe, and what, by the way, has happened ever since in Europe. They saw that ordinary people were disarmed, and the result was that governments became tyrannous, and they treated their populations with impunity. And we're seeing that now in Canada. We're seeing it in Western Europe. We're starting to see a government inch that way in our own country. And isn't it interesting that all of a sudden there's this push to disarm the American people? Somebody who's listening to this, who is arguing with me or wants to argue with me, I would want to tell you this. I want to emphasize this. The most irresponsible gun owner is federal government.
Can you say that one more time?
The most irresponsible gun owner. It isn't the individual, it's federal government.
Go ahead. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, let's just take Obama's Fast and Furious. Thousands of guns sold into Mexico that were then used in massacres in Mexico, killed federal border agents in this country. Guns that the Obama administration deliberately sold to cartels. We also know that this is a government, the one that wants to say you're not allowed to own a gun. They just left $85+ billion worth of state-of-the-art military hardware in Afghanistan. We know that stuff is now being sold by the Taliban to get hard currency. Some of those weapons will find their way to weapons markets, illegal weapons markets in Eastern Europe, and eventually into terrorist hands into Western Europe. We are presently arming a deeply corrupt country in Ukraine with what, $40 billion that we just sent. Those weapons, many of those weapons are going to find their way into terrorist hands. So I'm not prepared to have the Biden administration lecture me on gun ownership and proper gun safety. They're absolutely the worst.
So what we'll do when we come back is let's look at something that I really appreciated in your article, and that's this, is the different places where massacres have occurred, what type of weapons were used, and if they did use guns, what type of guns, and were they illegal or not. I think that's fascinating. So don't go anywhere. You don't want to miss this.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
So welcome back. A few years ago, you said you made your way to several of the most notorious scenes of mass murder as part of a research project.
Yeah.
I found that to be fascinating. In Nice, 86 killed. The weapon was?
A truck.
Charlie Hebdo, 17 killed.
Yep.
Now, the weapons here were very interesting because there were semi-automatic pistols, which were illegal.
Yep.
You had 3 fully automatic. They were also illegal. Grenades, illegal. Molotov cocktails, illegal. Rocket launchers, illegal. Dynamite, illegal. One hand grenade, illegal.
Yep.
So this idea that we would take guns away here to prevent anything illegal from happening.
Yeah, this is military. This
is
military
military
grade
stuff.
Yeah, this is military grade.
It's exactly what you're talking about, that we left weapons behind in Afghanistan. They're going to find their way into illegal, people are going to find the guns and they're going to be used. But I found that was very interesting. And then the Bataclan, 90 people were killed. And you had 3 Chinese model 56 fully automatic AK-47s. They were illegal. And then another 4 fully automatic rifles. And then suicide bomb vest. I mean, this is horrific. In London, 52 people killed, suicide bombers. In Madrid, Spain, a few years ago, we probably all remember that, 193 people killed. Bombs were the weapon of choice. The Stockholm shopping district, 5 were killed, and they used
a truck.
Boko Haram. There's an unknown amount of people that have been killed. I mean, we can't even fathom.
Yep.
Bombs and guns.
Yep.
Then London, we have 8 killed and a van and knives. Westminster Bridge, a van, and then 9/11 planes.
Yep.
So it's not the world's deadliest attacks, but the idea, though, is that guns were not used at all. That wasn't, they were in some of them, but in many of them, you used a truck, you used knives. That wasn't even in the conversation.
Bombs, suicide vests.
I mean, so
rocket launchers.
When we're having this same conversation, and loss of life anywhere is horrific.
Yeah.
It is devastating. It wrecks a culture, it wrecks a country. That is without saying. But why do we constantly then race to the take all the guns away?
Well, at an emotional level, that seems like the simple solution, right? People are getting killed in these mass killings. Let's take all the guns. Joe Burrow just a few days ago said we need to take away the crazy guns. These crazy kind of guns that people have. And of course, what he seems to be referring to there is fully automatic, machine gun style, weapons, and that suits a Democrat narrative, but it doesn't actually fit the model of what's actually happening. Let's talk about some of the commonalities in these attacks. Now, again, as you've pointed out, Amie Beth, I did make my way to a lot of these places. That was for an article or two that I was writing at the time. I don't even remember who I was writing it for. And it also appeared as a chapter in my book, Around the World in More Than 80 Days. I went to a lot of these different places, and when I had opportunity, I was interviewing witnesses to these horrific events, and certain themes began to emerge. First of all, as you pointed out, in those attacks with the greatest loss of life, guns were not the weapon of choice. Now, I have to tell you, finding what the weapons were that were used in when you would hear guns, finding out what those weapons were was extremely difficult to find out online, because it was almost like they don't want you to actually know. I mean, did anyone know that at Charlie Hebdo they had rocket launchers and sticks of grenades
No.
and Molotov cocktails and Kalashnikovs and this kind of stuff? I didn't know that. The impression that listen, I've been to Charlie Hebdo at least twice, maybe 3 times. I've read about Charlie Hebdo, wrote articles about Charlie Hebdo. The impression that I always got that you were always left with in any of the reports you'd read about it was that this was all exclusively about the kind of weapons that you could just go buy, at Dick's Sporting Goods. That's not what they were using. They're using weapons that were already illegal, that are fully automatic. They were also converting movie props. So they were getting movie props and converting them, and they were all coming out of government stocks, and they were coming out of illegal weapons markets, you see. So the idea, the narrative that you get, that this is just a guy who walks into, his bedroom and, pulls out a gun from a side drawer and then goes on, mass shootings. I won't say those kinds of things don't happen, but that's not what happened here. That isn't what happened here. This is, I think, maybe one of the reasons that the information about the kind of weapons that were being used is being suppressed is because it reflects poorly on the fact that the EU has not been able to enforce their existing laws. You don't need more laws. You need to enforce the ones that are on the books. These are all military grade weapons that are being used that are already illegal. And fully automatic, I can't own a fully automatic weapon. You can't own one. They definitely can't own one in France, and yet they were managing to get their hands on them. And again, this has a lot to do with irresponsible governments who are not keeping a close eye on their own weapon stocks. So that's one of the things. But some other themes that begin to emerge is that the victims were completely defenseless.
Yeah, see, this is one of the most important parts, is they willingly, in some cases, gave their guns away.
They did because being a law-abiding citizens, they weren't allowed to own them. So again, using the Bataclan as an example, but we could use Uvalde as an example as well, where the shooter enters into the building, also Columbine, back in, I think that was 99. That was a fairly short episode, but bombs were used there as well. And the shooters, knowing that their victims were unarmed, they could come in, empty a magazine on their victims, and casually reload and go at it again, because they knew they were facing people who were unarmed. At the Bataclan, which is a concert hall in Paris, it's in the 11th arrondissement. So for those of you who don't know, that's central Paris. Millions of people live in that proximity. You would think the police response would be very, very quick. Well, the police got there, but the police didn't immediately enter the building. It was 35 minutes before they entered the building. By that time, probably north of 80 plus are already dead. And the police themselves said we were wading through blood in order to get in there. There were, embarrassingly, how many times have you heard this stat? There were 8 off-duty police officers at the Bataclan concert hall. None of them were armed. Not one of them were armed. So part of my argument is not only are police late, at Norway, which an enormous massacre that took place in Norway, in an attack that lasted roughly 95 minutes, it was 80 minutes before the police began to engage. Again, by that time, he's killed all kinds of people on an island where he knows they are all unarmed. And he just goes around. It's like he's shooting fish in a barrel. He's able to do that. So not only is the police response slow in almost all of these instances, Uvalde, it's more than an hour before they entered the building. But even when the police arrive, let's say fairly rapidly, they spend a lot of time trying to, get some intel. Where are the shooters? How many are there? What kind of weapons do they have? Where are they now? What is their methodology? What are they doing? Which is understandable. But if somebody in the building themselves is armed, they know all of that already, and they can respond to that. And again, so that you'll understand, my point isn't that a person on the scene is always going to be an effective responder. Right. I'm saying that it is an infinitely more effective responder. So that in Charleston, West Virginia, last week, a man shows up at a graduation party with an AR-15. He begins to shoot at the crowd, and a woman there who is exercising her Second Amendment rights, she's concealing and carrying, and she pulls out a gun and shoots him dead before anybody is injured. Now that's what it should look like. At the Bataclan, there's nobody armed. Nobody can respond. In Norway, no one. At the Charlie Hebdo, no one is armed. At Uvalde, no one is armed. At Columbine, no one is armed. So to me, this whole idea, let's disarm people further, so that the woman who shot, who shot the assailant at the graduation party, let's remove her gun. How many people will be dead there now? Many. Criminals are going to get those weapons. They're going to lay their hands on those weapons. That's exactly what happens in many of these instances. I mean, bombs. I can't go down to Home Depot and buy M4 or what's it called? C4, excuse me, explosives. I can't do that. I can't go buy an M4 machine gun. So I can't do that. These people are managing to get their hands on them through illegal dealers. And so disarming citizenry to me makes no sense at all.
It doesn't. And I think it goes back, we said it the segment before, it is that the heart is deceptively wicked above all else, and who can know it?
Yeah.
I'd rather believe the word of God over what it says about my heart than to trust people who just want to keep their job to say, oh, we're going to fix this by taking away your guns, flanked with their own, soldiers, whatever beside them. I'm not going to believe you. And to take them away is not acceptable. But this idea that soft targets are going to become more and more the norm.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see that we've seen an increase in gun sales, but I think it's going to continue to increase as people feel increasingly unsafe in their own communities.
Yeah.
And that's horrible.
Well, and let's just consider this. I mean, that's an important point. Gun sales are up something like 33% just during the pandemic. Now, that suggests to me that Americans do feel unsafe. They no longer have a confidence their government will protect them. We have also seen an enormous spike in gun violence and mass shootings during the pandemic. Now, that to me is that roughly spans the time that the Biden administration has been in office. A lot of this we should lay at the door of the Oval Office. Looking at the American public and blaming the American public for what is happening, I don't think is the answer. I think that what was being modeled for us at the highest levels of our government is where most of this violence is originating. It's where it's coming from.
So we'll pause here, and then let's come back. And why don't we talk about solutions and ideas moving forward, and then finish with a few more segments after that. So come back, because we don't want to just talk about a problem without offering solutions and ideas. We'll be right back.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
Welcome back. So one of the questions we have is, what do you think some of the reasons are for the violence?
Before we get to that, let's remind people why we're asking that question. Because I believe that we are asking the wrong questions in the gun debate. The debate is always about, the question being asked is always, should Americans own guns? What kind of guns should they be allowed to own? How many should they be allowed to own? What should be the background checks or psychological checks? Or should there be red flag laws? And those are all the wrong questions. The question we should be asking is, why suddenly are there so many Americans who want to kill people? And that's a relatively recent phenomenon, because again, Americans have owned guns and owned a lot of guns throughout their history. We don't have data. There was no Pew Research or Barna out there doing polls of Americans in 1780. But I would bet you the number of gun owners was much higher in 1780, in 1830, in 1860, in 1900, in 1930, and 1950 than it is today. We don't have data on that, but the point being, Americans have always owned guns. So the fact that we are seeing in the, let's say, the last 30 years, a lot of these mass shootings, the question becomes not why should Americans own guns, or what should be the requirement for that, but why are we seeing these mass shootings? What has changed in the culture? And I think there are several things that we can point to as reasons for these mass killings. The first one I would point to is inciting violence. I mean, would you agree with me that it feels like at the highest levels of government that we're inciting violence?
Yes, oh, absolutely. I mean, I think you pointed out in your article that there are powerful leaders who are, taunting justices on the Supreme Court.
Yes.
They are inviting the
Charles
whirlwind.
Schumer.
I mean, really? This is what you have to say from the podium in your bully pulpit, is to invite violence? But yes, you're exactly right. So
the Biden administration has been inciting it for quite some time, and we know there are Soros-supported DAs around the country who have, one just recalled in San Francisco, who have refused to enforce their existing laws. I mean, listen, Chicago under Lori Lightfoot, a Democrat, Chicago has seen more than a 50% spike in murders. 50%. I mean, that's extraordinary. And that's, again, just in the last 2 years. So it's not like this has been a problem throughout our entire history. It's a fairly recent thing. And homicides are up 44% nationally. 44% nationally. And that's because you have so many of these Democrat DAs who are refusing to enforce the law. 18 out of the top 20 most dangerous cities in America are run by Democrat mayors. There's no mistake in this. Meaning this kind of relates to a topic that we, I think, talked about in the last show, which is cultural Marxism. Mm-hmm. And cultural Marxism is about causing disruption.
Right.
You want to cause disruption. So there has been an unwillingness to punish violence, and the fact that you're not punishing violence is a de facto encouragement of violence. We saw this in Ferguson. We saw it in taking place in Portland for months and months, where there seemed to be no effort to do anything about this. We have seen a sudden desire to punish the whole January 6th thing, which is a big nothing, relative to what we saw going on around the country for more than a year, where cities were being burned to the ground, billions in damage being done, north of maybe 20 people who were murdered, and where it seems there's no effort to seek out the murderers, no effort to punish them. This is inciting violence. So it's natural that there would be an increase in violence where there's lawlessness and where the rule of law is not being upheld. So that's the first thing I would point to. What are the reasons for why Americans want to kill other people now? Because violence is being incited. It's being encouraged from the highest level. The second thing, which relates to the first, is defund the police.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, how can you complain about a police response when you've been running an unrelenting campaign of defund the police, attacking the police? So,
right.
Again, this is a kind of way of inciting violence. We're not punishing criminals. We're going after police forces. We're telling them that they can't use force. We're telling them that, if you use your weapon in a way that we think is even remotely questionable, you'll likely be, tried and crucified, publicly. I was speaking to 2 Portland, Oregon police officers who told me they both decided to retire. And they said it was because you couldn't drive a block without seeing people defecating, on the sidewalk. They said this is very common in Portland, and they said that there'd been an enormous spike, which we know statistically, in violent crime and in theft, and that they were not being empowered to enforce the law because they said that, we arrest someone and they're immediately back out onto the street, just immediately. And we're actually being told, to kind of hold back and to not enforce the law. So it's no surprise that there's been a spike in gun sales, and I think it's because Americans feel, they feel unsafe, and they feel like, can I really count on the police if I call 911 and there's an intruder in my property or something like? Will they defend me? And I think most Americans feel like the answer to that question is no.
Well, you think about the couple during the riots that defended their property. I think it was in Missouri,
Yes.
on their front porch, and
perfect example.
they were prosecuted.
Yes.
I think he's out of jail now. But the idea that you were defending what is yours,
Yes.
and then you were punished for it, is ludicrous.
Yeah,
But
more
it's where
power
we
to
are.
them. More power to them. Third thing I would point to is irrational lockdowns. There's been a lot of discussion about mental health. And you actually raised, off air, the issue of, drug use and things like that affecting this, which is a whole other angle that's quite interesting to explore. But listen, I think the lockdowns were irrational. I think they're unreasonable for loads of reasons that I've mentioned on previous episodes of this show. But one of them is that we know that it leads to a spike in mental illness. Isolating people, we're not meant to function like that. We don't function like that. People need sunshine. They need air. They need human interaction, human touch. I will also say that there's been an unrelenting campaign, which relates to this, an unrelenting campaign of hysteria and fear. Do you live your life a little more anxiety now than you did 3 years ago?
I think some people would say
Yes.
they do, for sure.
I think a lot of people feel a lot more anxious now. They feel more anxious about their future, about their food supply,
Yes.
about their jobs, about their health.
Baby formula, gas,
Yes.
everything.
The economy, all of that is leading to a spike. And you remember that movie back in, I don't know if it was the early 90s or the late 80s, that was called Falling Down with
Yes.
Michael Douglas?
Yes.
Do you remember that?
I do remember
and
that.
The premise of that movie was he sitting in traffic in L.A. and the beads of sweat are gathering on his forehead, and it's hot, and he's feeling stressed, and he finally snaps, and he goes and buys all this military grade weaponry and goes on a shooting rampage all over the place. And the funny scene in that being where he goes in and orders a cheeseburger or something, and he gets it and it's wilting in his hand. And he says to the guy, behind the counter, "Why doesn't this look like that?" He points up at the screen, and the guy's a little surly with him, and he pulls out a shotgun and starts blowing everything away. That's the image that we have. And in some ways, it fits insofar as we have seen a tremendous spike. The Journal of American Medicine, the JAMA Network Open, as it's called, they did a study on this, and they've come to the conclusion that mass shootings have soared during the pandemic. And they said this: the COVID-19 pandemic imposed sudden and additional psychological and financial strains across society through fear of death, social isolation, economic hardship, and general uncertainty. That is 100% true. And so that people have responded irrationally to irrational measures taken against them shouldn't come as a great surprise to us.
So you also mentioned, though, that there's a war on God.
I did. And let me say this, Amie Beth, on that, the whole mental health issue. I have no data on this, but I am certain a major factor in all of this has to do also with the fact that people are spending, particularly young people, we know this, are spending far more time online.
Yes.
So because of lockdowns, or, we're past lockdowns right now, though they'll try to bring them back, to force, mail-in ballots, as we approach the midterms this November. We do know, though, that there's a lot of online learning. There's a lot of people working at home, and these kinds of situations. It's still not normal in Here in the South, we experience our experience is different than what's happening in a lot of other parts of the world. I can tell you, as a result of my traveling, and more time is being spent. I think I read somewhere that youth, adolescents, their time online has doubled during the pandemic. And how much of that time is spent in the dark corners, of the internet, which has led to a kind of pandemic and adolescent depression and anxiety.
Yes.
So, people need to get out. They need to engage in healthy activities. They need to engage with other people. These are real problems that have occurred as a result of irrational government measures.
So then let's visit with this issue, which is, I think, the most profound, is that there is a war against God.
Yeah, and to me, this is really the heart of the issue, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It really comes back to it. I mean, you would think that since we're faced with so many mass shootings, maybe somebody should just hang a sign on the wall that says, "Thou shalt not kill." But of course, that would be illegal.
Right.
You can't do that.
Let's not go there.
You can't do that, having drag queens and whatnot. And by the way, again, when we start asking the question, why do so many people feel the need, so many Americans feel the need to kill their fellow man, mass shootings are no more a symptom of a sick society than are drag queens twerking for preschoolers, meaning that these mass shootings are taking place in an atmosphere of general moral degeneracy. It's across the board, and it's not like the rest of our society looks very healthy and that everything else looks good and, oh, wow, weird, we have these mass shootings. No, we have seen the mainstreaming of homosexuality, the mainstreaming of every LGBTQ plus agenda you can think about. We are seeing the mainstreaming of Marxism. And as a result, we are also seeing spikes in suicides, spikes in violent crimes, spikes in shootings, spikes in depression, spikes in anxiety, all of these things. So the patient, the heart of America itself is diseased and sick right now. And mass shootings are just one symptom of that. And Democrats want to say that the rest is okay. Everything else I just mentioned, that stuff, there's nothing wrong with what we're seeing with, these drag queen shows, for preschoolers. That's all good and healthy. But we need to stop the mass killings. No, all this stuff is related. And it's related to the fact that we've driven God from the public square, from the public space. Absolute moral laws are no longer assumed to exist. So it's become a kind of anything goes, kind of culture. And listen, when you are running a campaign of defund the police, and police exist to enforce the law, and you're also running a decades-long war on God, who gives motivation to obey the law, should we really be shocked by this downward spiral that we're seeing in culture? So we really need to see a serious spiritual revival in our country.
I agree, because I think before we move on, I think something that you brought up in the article also is that, and I want to make sure I get this right, it was the the greatest mass murderers of all times were atheists.
Yeah, they're,
that's very interesting.
In listing all of these in the article, I list all of these sites of terrorist attacks, that I've visited, or mass killings.
Right.
And all of them were perpetrated by Muslims. Mm-hmm. Unless I give the impression that Muslims are the, that religion or ideology is the most dangerous ideology, it isn't. Isn't even close. Secularism, which is a philosophy unto itself, secularism, which has its roots in atheism, it is by far the most insidious worldview. And that has taken, as the Christian faith, I've just said that God is being driven out of the public space. Well, that's being replaced by a very aggressive secularism. And a secularist is very dangerous because he's either a nihilist or he's a utopian. And both are extremely dangerous. So we see a little bit of both in our culture. This World Economic Forum types, those are the utopians. Those are the people. I saw an article, I wish I could reference where I saw it. I just was reading a few headlines about it, but it was speaking in the language of utopia, that you will see the rise of new cities that are going to be built, that are modern cities made for the modern person, for the work-at-home person, that are truly environmentally friendly and all this. It was creepy.
It's very creepy.
And they're talking, like they're going to wipe the board clean and start all over again with their utopian ideology. Those ideologies that have left the most body bags, which are two, fascism and communism. And by communism, I mean socialism, Marxism. Those are all variants on a theme. Those have by far left the most body bags, and they did it in the 20th century. Collectively, they killed roughly 150 million people in that. And communism killed about 125 million of those people. So communism has killed by far the most, and yet somehow that ideology is treated as somewhat okay, and it's that we really have to be worried about these extreme right-wingers, fascists, this kind of thing. It's not fascism that's the real threat in this country. That might be a future show to talk about the differences between those two, because there are some great similarities in them. But anyway, all of that is just by way of saying that what they have in common is godlessness, utter godlessness, and that they believe that they can create utopian societies. And they're ideologues. And I define an ideologue as this. An ideologue is someone who believes their ideas matter more than people. You're so devoted to your environmental scheme that you don't care what it does to other people. You think of yourself as being very, very moral, and what you're doing is utterly immoral to human beings. Right. But you're so dedicated to that thing, or to your animal rights advocacy, which becomes extremely immoral, in which in Romans 1, Paul is predicting this is what happens when you suppress belief in God. He then says it leads to the worship of animals. I mean, have we seen that? So where you're worshiping animal life above that of human life because you become unhinged, and you see that. Or, as we're seeing in our own society, they believe that it is because they don't believe in a God that will judge them in the next life for their actions in this one. We are seeing a media and a government and their allies in culture. They think it's okay to smear you, to mischaracterize you, to censor you, to mistreat you, to cancel you, knowing that those things are wicked and wrong. But they justify them because they to borrow a line from Machiavelli's The Prince, the end justifies the means. So I'm justified in doing that to you because it's for the greater good of society. Think of how wicked that is. It's
very wicked and very narcissistic. I mean, that's where we're living. But you're right. A revival is the answer, isn't it? I mean,
yes, it is. And I listen, I just want to, because there are people who are watching or who are listening who are saying, Larry, rolling their eyes.
Yeah.
The idea that belief in God has anything to do with me being a moral person is sheer nonsense. Well, no, it's not. Those of you who would say that haven't a leg to stand on. Now, you can watch my debate with Christopher Hitchens, where we talked about this very topic. And I think I annihilated Hitchens on this issue because he wanted to argue this, and history doesn't support him in this at all. Not at all. But let me borrow a line from David Berlinski, who, by the way, is an agnostic, but borrow a paragraph from his book, The Devil's Delusion, where he says this, because I think he makes the point that I'm here making brilliantly. He says this: what Hitler did not believe, and by the way, David Berlinski was part of the Varian Fry Jews. Varian Fry was an American. He was funded by a number of philanthropists who went to France to smuggle Jewish intellectuals out of Europe who had fled Germany, went to France. Abby Mann was among them. Thomas Mann, and Abby Mann's an author. And also, suddenly her name's gone out of my head. Hannah Arendt was another one.
Wow.
Well, I say that David was one of them. He wasn't, because he wasn't born until his parents were in the United States. But his father was a famous German conductor, but Jewish, and he was smuggled out of Europe and came to the United States. And three of David's grandparents were killed in the Holocaust. So David knows what he's talking about when he says this. What Hitler did not believe, and what Stalin did not believe, and what Mao did not believe, and what the SS did not believe, and what the NKVD did not believe, and what the commissars, functionaries, swaggering executioners, Nazi doctors, Communist Party theoreticians, intellectuals, brown shirts, black shirts, gauleiters, and 1,000 party hacks did not believe was that God was watching what they were doing. And as far as we can tell, very few of those carrying out the horrors of the 20th century worried over much that God was watching what they were doing either. That is, after all, the meaning of a secular society. Now, that's powerful.
It is.
And it does matter. But my point isn't that if you're a Christian, you're automatically a good person. I mean, Jesus, in teaching the disciples how to pray, calls them evil.
Right.
Which I think is interesting. And we've just referenced Jeremiah 17:9. So the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked above all things. We know that. So we become forgiven when we become Christians, and we receive God's grace. But I think grace transforms us to the extent that we begin to exhibit it outwardly. And however bad I am now, I'm a little less evil than I would otherwise be if I were not a Christian, meaning it serves as a restraint on my life.
I just wanted you to repeat that, because I think the most misunderstood part about Christianity is that Jesus didn't come for the great, the extra special, the most magnificent.
Yeah.
He came for the worst. And the ability that now we have, yes, we are forgiven, but we can realistically say, I am a little less bad.
Yeah.
I'm still bad.
Yeah.
It is refreshing to hear somebody like you say that. Because I think there's this misunderstanding that when you become a Christian, you become perfect.
Yeah,
and that
holier
is
than thou,
absolutely
and you've got all of it together. It's not true. I mean,
No.
One of the most remarkable things about Scripture is that it records the heinous sins of Christians throughout the Bible. So that we have Moses, committing murder. We have David committing adultery and murder. We have Peter, committing a terrible betrayal of Jesus. These are all things that are recorded in Scripture for us. So this idea, sometimes I laugh when I take tour groups to Europe, and I love to read cathedrals. Cathedrals are meant to be read. And so we'll be standing outside of a cathedral. I'll be showing people how to read a cathedral. And invariably, cathedrals have on them the 12 disciples or apostles. And they usually have halos, and this kind of thing. And I think, boy, doesn't that just clash with the biblical perception of who they are? Because they were not that. Not that at all. They were very fallen. I love what Evelyn Waugh, the famous British author, said. Somebody told him what a horrible person he was, and he said, "And imagine how much worse I would be if I were not a Christian."
I need to put that above my desk. I love that. So, okay, two things. As we come back, we'll wrap it up. We have a stat of the week, and we also have a little bit of good news, maybe a little bit of entertainment news. So you don't want to miss that.
This is the Larry Alex Taunton Show.
Okay, so how about a stat for the week? And perhaps after that, a little good news, because this stat of the week isn't exactly wonderful, Do you know what it is?
I do, because we're refilming this segment, because I was just coughing my lung out just a minute ago. So we're reshooting this segment.
Reality.
But let's play it like I don't know. What is the stat of the week, Amie Beth?
It's not a good one.
What is it?
It is that the abortion rate in this country has risen to 1 in 5 pregnancies are terminated.
And where does that data come from?
So it comes from the Guttmacher Institute, which is the arm of Planned Parenthood.
So Planned Parenthood is actually admitting this.
This is their research arm. So
Wow.
whenever I was speaking on the subject of abortion, character education, abstinence, any of that, way back in the day, I began to use the Guttmacher Institute. And they are actually perhaps better than some government organizations at research, because they're very detailed. But 1 in 5 pregnancies are aborted.
So that's not 1 in 5 teen pregnancies.
No.
That's not 1 in 5 among a specific demographic. It's 1 in 5 total pregnancies in the United States.
So we had been on a decline previous to 2017.
A decline in abortion.
A decline in abortion, excuse me. I'm really sorry about that. But then after 2017, when they began to track 2017 through 2020, 1 in 5.
Wow.
And so another interesting fact, though, that goes along with it is that states like Illinois, for example, began to allow Medicaid funds to pay for abortions. So I think in that case, you can say you get what you pay for, and what you pay for is death.
Wow. 1 in 5. You can't sustain a population like that.
No, you cannot. And I've been reading a little bit more about that, and we are at a very precarious point in the life of our country. In that regard. So how about, because that's so heavy, some good news?
Well, let me say this. That stat, it dovetails with the theme of this show,
Yes,
which
does.
is gun violence, and it does for this reason. Because again, this comes back to the war on God. If I believe that you're an object of special creation, if I believe there's a God who created you and who wanted you to be, that obliges me to treat you in a very different way than if I believe, as we are teaching our young people, that you and I are both a product of random chance and necessity. You're essentially saying that life is meaningless. And young people see through that immediately. I deal with a lot of high school and college age people, and they immediately see through the hypocrisy of, at least many of them do, the hypocrisy of a culture that tells them on the one hand, in essence, your life is meaningless, and on the other, give back to communities,
Right.
give back to society, care for the environment, care about social justice. Why? Why should I care about anything other than myself? Because life is meaningless. There is no God. I should just, live for myself and try to get as much out of this as I can for myself. So that's one thing. On the other hand, we are demonstrating that that's what we believe as a society when we're annihilating our unborn. So we're annihilating our unborn, and then we're seeing mass shootings. You see, again, the government wants to address one and not the other. No, you're killing far more people than are mass shooters, but the two of them go together because we're sending an immoral message to our citizens.
Wow. You know what? As an adopted person, and as someone who appreciates that my 17-year-old birth mom made it through an entire year of high school without ever telling anybody that I existed, but she had me, makes me more grateful the older that I get. The more that grandchildren come along, the more that we look forward to spending time with them, that we are absolutely, without question, as you said, annihilating, obliterating anything that we don't want. We just get rid of it. And who cares? Except we do, because we know we were stamped with the image of God. And we are created in his image, which means we must care for the unborn. We must also care for their mothers. But we have to realize that violence begets violence. And to address the gun issue today in human life, and to address abortion and ending human life, is one and the same, life is sacred.
Yeah.
And it's worth protecting.
Yeah, when you're encouraging violence, you get it not only in the broader culture, you get it in the womb.
Yeah. Wow. So a pivot, perhaps.
Yeah, this is actually a new little segment that we're adding, and that is an entertainment segment. And just for fun, did you see anything interesting this last week?
Actually, we did.
Okay, what did you see?
We finally made it to Maverick.
The like Top Gun 2, or
Yes.
the sequel to the original
Yeah.
Top Gun.
Were you a fan of the original?
I was a huge fan of the original. I was what was I when that came out? That came out like 86.
Mm-hmm.
So that would make me 19, at the time. So prime age to love a movie like that. And I remember going with my college roommates to a theater in Omaha, Nebraska. It was called the Indian Hills Theater, which was this. It was kind of a big deal. It was a panoramic screen, this giant kind of panoramic screen. This was not IMAX or anything like that, but it was kind of surround sound and visually spectacular. So I would feel like I'd need to see this one. And you went to the theater?
We went to the theater. I actually became a member of whatever theater club would get me a few less dollars for my ticket, a discount.
I didn't know there was such a thing.
Yeah, I didn't either, but I joined it just so I could get tickets, and it was actually fantastic. It was one of those movies, and I know that people, hype something up and they're like, "Oh, it's as good as the first one," and you're like, "Yeah, it's really not. It was not good."
Yeah.
And I know that you sound
That's
like
why I felt about Temple of Doom.
yeah, what the first one was better. I do love the Indiana Jones series, but the second
one sucked.
It was not very good.
It was bad.
It was very bad. But I'll still watch it if it comes on TBS
Sure.
on the weekend.
And the Star Wars movie with Ewoks.
What was that?
That was pretty.
I don't
crappy
understand
too.
that.
Was that Return of the Jedi? Because I thought
blocked it out.
I thought you blocked it out of your memory. I thought The Empire Strikes Back was great.
Yeah,
I enjoyed that one. But yeah, so Top Gun 2, Maverick, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Thumbs up.
Siskel, what do you give us?
Thumbs up. The jacket, the patches on the jacket, there's a little story there. I encourage our listeners to go and figure that out. But the patches are the same.
Was there any LGBTQ stuff pushed in that movie?
Zero.
Awesome.
It was a great, just
so Maverick
feel
wasn't
good.
Maverick wasn't gay or trans.
No.
In this one.
No.
Okay. So he wasn't like riding like side saddle or anything like that in his his F-15 or F-16.
Go watch the movie.
Okay.
It's worth it. It's worth the $27 a ticket.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I am.
Wow. No
But it's
wonder.
still-
No
but it's
wonder
still
you joined the
expensive.
club. Okay. Is this was this your first time to the movie theater in a long time?
No, we didn't really stay home. Chris had to work through the whole thing. So we went out when the theaters were open, and we'd be the only people in the theater. However,
I haven't been to a theater in ages.
we love movies, and so that has always been our thing. I think it helps me see life. I see God in movies and themes. And this one was fantastic. It is worth the money. It's worth the time. The storyline is good. It's interesting. And it's one of those in a very long time where you felt good about our country.
Really?
Yeah.
I think it's Philip, our tech guy. He had texted me that he was going to see it, and I was curious what he would think about it. But he was telling me this was his response. He said it was amazing, as good or potentially better than the first one. I can hardly believe it. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. The flight scenes were unbelievable.
And I understand they're actually not CGI. They're like real.
No, they're real. And that was the other part.
They were paying like $1 million an hour to rent these planes or something.
Well, I was reading a little background on it because everything is so CGI, and now you see it, and it's kind of disappointing because you're like, well, that kind of takes the fun away.
Yeah, it kind of
from
looks
movies.
cartoonish.
But Tom Cruise has always insisted on doing his own.
And he's apparently a
stunts.
pilot.
Like he is.
Yeah, like a serious pilot.
Like really and truly, just to see the way that they fly.
Yeah.
In the air, no CGI. You can tell it's real.
Yeah.
But it's authentic.
Yeah.
Worth it.
So did you think it was better than the first one?
I think that it was as good or better than the first one. I would say popcorn buckets. There's 6 in our well, 7 now. I have a son-in-law. I would say it's 7 overflowing popcorn buckets.
And if people are wanting to take their children, can they take them to this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't even remember if there was any language. I don't think that there was. Usually my language sensor goes off.
I would forgive some language like blowing up some bad guys.
And they, you know,
There
in
should
some
be
of
some
them,
language
there is
there.
some language, but it's not in some of those movies that you think, gosh, I need to apologize if that bothers people.
Yeah.
Don't see this movie. No, take your kids. In fact, we saw a whole family walking in with
Sex
their little
scenes?
ones. 0.
No, 0 sex scenes. Interesting.
0.
That's very interesting because that makes that's an element in the first one.
It tiptoed that way.
But it was heterosexual.
It was a boy and a girl.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, there we go. Well, that movie, I think I will go with my boys to see it based on your recommendation. I think I want to go. So that sounds fabulous.
Yeah. So you know what, everybody, thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Larry Alex Taunton Show. We hope that you will give us a 5-star review. And please like this, spread the word, and we'll see you next time.
Turn out the lights, the party's over. They say that all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful for the standing ovation, but there will be no encore for today's performance. Please exit the building in an orderly fashion. Thank you.
Honey, can we leave now?